The Vanishing Hitchhiker, Chapter 1. Tim adjusted his leather jacket as he stepped out of his cramped, book-filled apartment. Mist, his Abyssinian cat, barely glanced up from her perch by the window. The evening air was cool, brushing against his face as he jogged down the steps, dodging a stack of old newspapers he'd been meaning to toss. His phone buzzed with a notification from Michael, something about a family dinner next week. He sighed, tucking it back into his pocket. The city around him hummed with life. A distant wail of sirens, chatter from the bar across the street, and the steady stream of traffic all blended into a familiar rhythm. Today, Tim had a lead to follow. A small agricultural company rumored to be dumping chemicals into the river. The tip was vague, but his editor had insisted on looking into it. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept him moving, kept his mind off other things. Tim flagged down a taxi. The driver was a gruff-looking man with a beard that seemed to have grown in patches. As they drove out toward the industrial area, Tim made notes on his phone, mostly reminders to check the company's public records. He barely noticed when the driver started talking. "Sorry, what was that?" Tim asked, looking up from his screen. "I said, be careful out that way. My buddy Rick, he used to drive that route. Last week, he just dropped dead behind the wheel. Heart attack," they said. Tim raised an eyebrow. "That's rough. Was he sick?" The driver shook his head. "Nah. Healthy guy, scared of his own shadow, but healthy. Thing is, night before he died, he picked up a hitchhiker out by Route 19, real late. Said she looked lost. Young girl in a red coat. Gave her a ride, but by the time he got to town, she was gone. Rick swore she just vanished." Tim frowned. "You believe him?" The driver hesitated. "I don't know. Rick wasn't one to lie. Next day, dead. I just think maybe there's something out there that scared him to death." Tim glanced out the window, watching as the buildings thinned into warehouses and chain-link fences. He couldn't help but think the guy was just spinning a weird story, like cab drivers sometimes did. Maybe someone tried to rob Rick and he freaked out, or maybe there was another explanation, a health issue he didn't know about. Still, it nagged at him. One driver dead, and now rumors about some vanishing girl? It was probably just urban legend nonsense, but it wouldn't hurt to poke around. Plus, the driver had looked genuinely unnerved when he mentioned it. Tim paid his fare and stepped out, making a mental note to look up Rick's death later. As he walked toward the small, dingy office building of the agricultural company, he noticed a local newspaper on a nearby table. The headline read, "Truck driver dies suddenly, heart attack or fear." He picked it up, skimming the article. Rick's name was there, along with a brief mention of his final route. No mention of robbery or an attack, just sudden death. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe someone tried to scare Rick and it worked too well. Tim slipped the paper into his bag, deciding to follow up after his investigation. He figured talking to Rick's family or anyone who knew him might shed some light on what really happened, just to cover all angles. When a bored-looking manager finally greeted him, Tim tried to focus on the chemical dumping story. But his thoughts kept circling back to the girl in the red coat. Why would a hitchhiker vanish from a moving car? Maybe the story just got twisted along the way. He'd heard weirder things, but not many that gave him this uneasy feeling. After a tedious hour of talking to the manager and taking notes about the company's waste management policies, Tim felt drained. The story wasn't shaping up to be anything exciting, just corporate negligence and weak regulations. As he wrapped up, he couldn't resist checking his phone for local forums and community pages. There, buried between complaints about potholes and missing pets, was a thread about the hitchhiker. A few people chimed in, saying they'd heard the story from a friend or knew someone who saw her. No one seemed to have a clear picture of who the girl was or why she was out there. Back at his apartment, Tim fed mist and tossed his jacket over the back of a chair. He fired up his laptop, digging into any records about Route 19, accidents, deaths, anything that might hint at the girl's identity. Nothing stood out at first, just minor fender benders and a few DUIs. Then, buried in an old newspaper archive, he found a brief article from 12 years ago. Local teen found dead after disappearing on Route 19. A girl named Sarah Connolly, 16, red coat, last seen hitchhiking. Cause of death, exposure. The body had been found 3 days later in a ditch by the road. Tim sat back, heart thudding. Maybe the taxi driver wasn't just spinning stories after all. He didn't want to jump to supernatural conclusions. Maybe it was just a coincidence, some prank, or even someone preying on drivers with the legend as a cover. A part of him wanted to believe it was just some twisted human to human crime. But something didn't add up. The way the driver had talked, the sense of fear in his voice, it didn't fit the pattern of a typical robbery or accident. Mist hopped onto the table, nudging his hand with her head, and Tim absent-mindedly scratched behind her ears. He needed to know more, starting with talking to anyone who knew Sarah. The legend might be nothing, but there was something here, a piece of the past still haunting that road. The next morning, Tim made a few calls, trying to track down anyone connected to Sarah's case. Most people either didn't remember or weren't willing to talk. Finally, a retired cop named Lou agreed to meet him. Lou's voice had been gruff over the phone, but softened when Tim mentioned Sarah. She was a good kid, Lou had said, a hint of regret in his tone. Didn't deserve what happened. Tim couldn't help but wonder, what if the story wasn't just a coincidence? What if Sarah's spirit had never left that road? Back at his apartment, Tim spread out his notes on the small wooden table. Mist circled the pile, finally settling on the edge, her tail flicking lazily. Tim absent-mindedly scratched her head while he stared at the photograph of Sarah Connolly on his laptop screen. He kept replaying Lou's words in his mind. Clean shoes, no tire tracks, fear didn't kill Rick. It was like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He couldn't get past the feeling that he was overlooking something simple but important. He spent the next few hours diving into local folklore forums, hoping to find anything about Route 19 or similar sightings. The story of the vanishing hitchhiker wasn't unique. Variations existed across the country, some even dating back decades, but none matched this one exactly. One post from a few years back caught his eye. A trucker mentioned seeing a girl in a red coat late at night, standing by the side of Route 19, but when he slowed down, she disappeared. The trucker thought he was just tired, but reading it now, Tim wasn't so sure. Another comment described seeing a flash of red in the rearview mirror, but when the driver stopped, no one was there. Tim leaned back, rubbing his eyes. If the sightings spanned years, that meant whatever this was, it wasn't new. But why now? Why Rick? And why did some see her while others didn't? His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. Michael, sending a video of his daughter playing with their new puppy. Tim smiled faintly, but his mind was still tangled in the case. He typed a quick reply, then decided he needed to see Route 19 for himself. It was risky, but there was no way he could ignore it now. Night had fallen by the time he parked near the long, dark stretch of road. The air felt colder than usual, and Tim shivered despite his jacket. He walked slowly, his footsteps crunching on the gravel shoulder. The road was eerily quiet, the trees on either side looming in the dim light from his flashlight. He stopped at the spot where Sarah's body had been found. There was nothing remarkable about it now, just a patch of dirt and a faded cross someone had hammered into the ground. A chill skittered up his spine, and he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing there. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps on the road made him whip around. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, but no one was there. He strained to listen. Nothing but the rustle of leaves. He checked his phone. No signal. Typical. Taking a breath, he moved further down the road, his senses on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Then faintly he heard it, a soft, almost whispering voice. Tim froze, his heart pounding. The words were too muffled to make out, but they seemed to drift from somewhere ahead. He took a cautious step forward, straining to hear. The voice stopped, replaced by a long, low moan like the wind howling through the trees. His pulse quickened, and he glanced back toward his car. Maybe this was a bad idea. Just as he was about to turn back, he saw it, a flash of red in the distance, moving slowly across the road. He squinted, trying to focus. The figure looked small, like a young girl, walking without hurry, barely visible in the darkness. "Hey!" Tim called out, but the figure didn't respond. He jogged forward, but by the time he reached the spot, it was empty. No footprints. Nothing. He stayed still, listening, but the night had swallowed the sound. Feeling a chill deeper than the night air, Tim hurried back to his car, his instincts screaming at him to leave. As he sped back toward the city, He couldn't help but glance in his rearview mirror, half expecting to see that flash of red again. Back home, Mist greeted him with a meow, clearly annoyed at his late return. Tim collapsed onto the couch, his mind racing. He didn't want to admit it to himself, but he knew what he'd seen. Whether it was a ghost or something else, he tried not to dwell on it away this time. His phone buzzed again, a message from Ronald asking about a weekend trip. Tim ignored it for now, staring at his laptop screen. He opened a new document and began typing up everything he'd learned so far. The logical part of his brain was fighting him, telling him it had just been shadows and nerves, but he couldn't shake the image of that red coat. Maybe it was time to visit Sarah's mother. Even if it stirred up old pain, she might know something about the night her daughter died, something that would make sense of all this. Tim rubbed his temples, exhaustion pulling at him, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Mist curled up beside him, purring softly, unaware of the weight pressing down on Tim's thoughts. He didn't know what he was dealing with yet, but whatever it wasn't done with him. The next morning, Tim woke up with a stiff neck, having fallen asleep on the couch with Mist curled up on his chest. He rubbed his face, trying to shake off the remnants of uneasy dreams, red coats and whispering voices that seemed to linger even as he blinked himself awake. After a quick shower and a strong cup of coffee, he sat down at his desk to organize his thoughts. The more he thought about last night, the more it felt like he had imagined it all. But he couldn't ignore the tension in his gut or the way his skin prickled when he remembered that flash of red. Tim spent the next few hours compiling his notes. He didn't have much to go on, just fragments. Sarah Connolly's death, Rick's heart attack, and that strange figure on Route 19. He needed to talk to Sarah's mother, but he couldn't just show up empty-handed. A quick search online brought up an address. Ellen Connolly still lived in the same house on the outskirts of town. Tim hesitated, his finger hovering over the phone. How could he explain why he was dredging up the past? He decided to take a different approach first. He called the local library and asked if they had any archives on Route 19 accidents. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Doreen, seemed eager to help. "I'll pull what we have. You can come by this afternoon," she offered. Tim agreed, grateful for the lead. As he got ready to leave, his phone buzzed again. Ronald. This time, Tim picked up. "Hey man, you okay? You've been kind of quiet lately." Ronald's voice crackled through the speaker. Tim hesitated. "Yeah, just wrapped up in a story. Nothing big." Ronald snorted. "That's what you always say when you're spiraling into conspiracy mode. You sure you're not going full tinfoil hat on me?" Tim couldn't help but smile. "Not yet. Just weird stuff with that cab driver story, trying to piece it together. If you end up chasing Bigfoot through the woods, call me first. I'll bring beer." "Deal," Tim said, hanging up. He appreciated Ronald's lightheartedness. It kept him from sinking too far into his own head. The library was quiet when Tim arrived. Doreen greeted him with a stack of old newspapers and a cup of tea. "These should cover most of the accidents on Route 19, she said. Tim flipped through the brittle pages, scanning headlines. Most were typical rural tragedies, car crashes, a few hit and runs, nothing unusual. Then one caught his eye. Local teen found dead on Route 19. The article was brief, but mentioned that Sarah Connolly was last seen leaving a party at her friend's house. He found another article from 2 years prior. Mysterious death of local man. The man, Carl Hanley, had been found in his truck, also on Route 19, slumped over the wheel, face frozen in terror. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Doreen noticed his interest. "That one was strange," she said. "People said he was driving home late and swerved off the road. No drugs, no alcohol. They just found him like that, like he'd seen a ghost." Tim's mind raced. 2 deaths, years apart, but both linked by fear and that lonely stretch of road. He needed more, something to tie it all together. He thanked Doreen and made his way to his car, still chewing on the new information. Maybe Ellen Connolly could fill in some gaps. He decided to stop by her place on his way back, hoping she wouldn't slam the door in his face. As he pulled out of the library parking lot, his phone chimed. A message from Michael this time. "Dinner at our place this weekend? You need to see how big the puppy's getting." Tim typed a quick reply, promising to come by. Normalcy. He needed that. But first, he had to see Sarah's mother. He turned onto the main road, thoughts swirling with theories and doubts. Mist would be waiting when he got home, probably demanding dinner, but right now he couldn't let this go. Not yet. Tim pulled up to the Connolly house, a small, weathered bungalow on the edge of town. The lawn was overgrown, and the paint on the porch railings had long since peeled away. He could hear the faint hum of a radio from inside, some country tune playing low. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A minute passed, and he wondered if maybe Ellen wasn't home, but then there creaked open. Ellen Connolly stood there, her eyes wary and tired. She looked older than her years, grief etched into the lines on her face. "Mrs. Connolly?" Tim asked gently. "I'm Tim Evans. I'm a journalist looking into some of the incidents on Route 19. I was hoping you might be willing to talk about Sarah." Her mouth tightened, and she hesitated. "You people don't quit, do you? Do you?" she muttered. "I'm not here to stir up trouble," Tim said. I think there's more to what happened to Sarah. I want to help, if I can." Ellen eyed him cautiously, then sighed. "Come in," she said, stepping back to let him through. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Framed photographs covered one wall, mostly of Sarah at different ages, smiling in her school uniform, holding a basketball trophy, laughing at some family picnic. Tim could feel the weight of loss in the room. Ellen gestured for him to sit, then sank into a faded armchair. "I don't know why you're digging this up now," she said, folding her hands in her lap. Tim chose his words carefully. "I know this is hard. There have been other deaths on that road. People say they died from fear, like they saw something that shouldn't be there. I'm trying to find out what's really going on." She looked at him sharply. "Fear? You think fear killed my daughter?" "No, I'm not saying that," Tim replied. "But did Sarah ever mention anything strange about Route 19? Or seem scared of something in the weeks before she died?" Ellen thought for a moment. "No. I mean, Sarah wasn't scared of much. She was brave, sometimes too brave for her own good. But about a week before it happened, she told me she saw something on her way back from Amber's party. I thought it was just some drunk or a hitchhiker. She said there was a girl standing on the side of the road, waving like she needed help." Tim leaned forward. "Did she stop?" "No. She said something didn't feel right. The girl looked wrong, like she didn't belong there. Sarah said she drove faster and didn't look back." Tim's pulse quickened. "Did she say what the girl looked like?" "A red coat," Ellen whispered, her voice trembling. "She said it was so bright in the headlights, like blood. I thought it was just her imagination. She'd had a few drinks. Nothing crazy, but I figured she was just seeing things." Tim's mouth went dry. "Mrs. Connolly, I know this sounds strange, but I think that girl might be connected to what happened. You said Sarah never mentioned it again?" "No," Ellen said, wiping at her eyes. "She didn't. I should have asked her more. Maybe if I had." Tim reached out, his voice soft. "You couldn't have known. I'm just trying to make sense of it now. You've helped more than you know." Ellen didn't respond, just stared at the floor. After a moment, Tim thanked her and left, his mind racing. As he got back into his car, he felt a surge of both dread and determination. He needed to know who or what this girl in the red coat was, and why she only appeared to some people. The more he learned, the more dangerous it felt, but Tim couldn't let it go. Not now. As he started the engine, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A red scrap of fabric caught on a fence post across the street. His heart pounded, but when he looked closer, it was just a faded ribbon flapping in the wind. Tim shook his head, trying to steady his breathing. He needed to get back to his apartment and figure out his next move. As he drove away, he couldn't help but glance at his rearview mirror, half expecting to see a flash of red trailing behind him. Back at his apartment, Tim sat at his desk, laptop open, fingers drumming nervously on the wood. Mist, sensing his agitation, leapt onto the desk and nuzzled his arm. He scratched behind her ears absent-mindedly, his mind still caught on the red coat. He pulled up the old articles he'd scanned at the library, searching for any mention of a girl in red. Nothing. Just the same vague reports about fear-induced deaths and heart attacks. He switched tactics, searching local urban legends and folklore. After nearly an hour of dead ends, he finally stumbled onto a blog post from 5 years ago. The post detailed various ghost stories tied to rural highways, and one caught his eye: the lady in the red coat. According to the blog, the story varied by region, but the core was the same. Drivers would see a woman in a red coat on the side of the road appearing out of nowhere. Those who stopped to help never made it to their destination. Most were found dead in their vehicles. Heart attacks, accidents, or simply vanishing without a trace. One line sent a chill down Tim's spine. Some say the lady is a spirit of a woman who died tragically, wandering the roads to find someone to take her home. Others believe she's something far darker, preying on the living who cross her path. Tim sat back, rubbing his temples. Folklore didn't kill people, but the pattern was too clear to ignore. He needed to know more about Sarah's last night. Maybe one of her friends at that party could remember something useful. A knock on the door startled him. Mist bolted from the desk, ears flattened. Tim peered through the peephole, relaxing when he saw Ronald's familiar face. "Hey," Ronald greeted, holding up a six-pack of craft beer. "Figured you could use a break." Tim forced a smile. "You're not wrong. Come in." They settled on the couch, the TV playing an old rock documentary in the background. Ronald cracked open a beer and handed one to Tim. "So what's eating you? You look like you haven't slept in days." Tim took a sip before answering. "Just working on this story, weird stuff happening out on Route 19. I think it's connected to that cab driver who died." Ronald raised an eyebrow. "Thought that was just a heart attack." "Yeah, but there's more to it. People keep seeing this girl in a red coat before they die. It sounds insane, but I'm starting to wonder if there's something to it." Ronald snorted. "Next, you'll be telling me it's a government experiment gone wrong. Look, man, you've been cooped up too long. Want to go for a run tomorrow? Clear your head?" Tim shook his head. "Maybe. Just, I can't shake this feeling that I'm onto something real, like it's not just in my head." Ronald took a long sip, his expression softening. "I get it. You need a win. But don't let this eat you up, okay? Call me if you need backup chasing this ghost girl." They fell into easier conversation after that, talking about Ronald's latest date and Michael's new puppy. Tim appreciated the distraction, even as his mind kept circling back to the girl in red. After Ronald left, Tim glanced at his notes again, determination renewed. If Sarah's friends had seen something, or if anyone else had, he needed to find out. He grabbed his coat and keys. The night was still young, and Route 19 wasn't far. The night air was crisp as Tim drove toward Route 19, headlights cutting through the dark. His hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual, every shadow along the roadside making his heart pound a little harder. He didn't know what he expected to find. Maybe he just wanted to see the place with fresh eyes, looking for signs he missed the night before. Or maybe a part of him wanted to prove it wasn't just his imagination. He parked at the same spot where Rick had pulled over that fateful night. The road was empty, quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Tim stepped out, his breath misting in the cold air. He scanned the area, flashlight in hand, but nothing seemed out of place, just cracked asphalt and weathered road signs. Then he saw it, a faint shimmer at the edge of the road, like something caught in the light. He approached cautiously, heart thudding. A single worn red glove lay in the dirt, fingers curled as if reaching for something. Tim picked it up carefully, examining it. The fabric was stiff from the cold, stained with what looked like old mud. A chill ran down his spine. Had this belonged to the girl in the red coat, or was it just a random piece of trash blown from a passing car? His phone buzzed, startling him. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Hesitating, he answered, "Hello." Silence. Then a faint, distorted voice crackled through. "Help! Me." Tim's throat went dry. "Who is this?" The line hissed, and then a soft, muffled sob. "She's coming. Don't look back." The call cut off abruptly. Tim's hand shook as he lowered the phone, his pulse racing. Was someone playing a prank on him? Or was it something else entirely? His instincts screamed at him to leave, but he couldn't just walk away. He circled the area, looking for any signs of recent activity. Nothing. Just the glove and the eerie quiet. He was about to head back to his car when he heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking like heels on pavement. Tim froze, every muscle tensing. Slowly he turned, shining his flashlight down the road. There, just past the bend, stood a figure. A woman in a red coat, her back to him. She seemed to hover in the dim light, motionless like a doll propped upright. Tim swallowed hard, unsure whether to approach or run. Before he could decide, the woman took a step forward, then another, disappearing around the curve. His legs finally moved, instinct taking over as he rushed to his car and slammed the door shut. He sat there, panting, eyes glued to the road. When he finally dared to look back, the road was empty. No figure, no footsteps, just silence. He peeled out of there, tires skidding on the loose gravel. Back at his apartment, Tim double-locked the door and sank onto the couch, heart still racing. Mist jumped up beside him, purring softly as if trying to calm him down. He stroked her fur, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Maybe Ronald was right. Maybe he was losing it. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd come face to face with something not of this world. He pulled out his phone and stared at the call log. The unknown number still displayed. Whatever this was, he couldn't let it go. He had to dig deeper, no matter how crazy it seemed. The next morning, Tim woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds, mist curled up beside him. His mind was still tangled in last night's events, and his first instinct was to chalk it up to exhaustion and stress. But the memory of the woman in red, so vivid, so real, wouldn't leave him alone. He made a pot of coffee and absent-mindedly scrolled through his phone. The call log still showed the unknown number, a silent reminder that something strange had happened. He copied the number and ran it through a reverse phone lookup site. No matches. Typical. Tim rubbed his eyes, frustration mounting. Maybe he needed a new approach. He dialed Ronald's number, knowing he'd get an earful for being up this early. "Yeah?" Ronald grumbled when he picked up. "Sorry to wake you. Something happened last night." There was a pause, followed by a yawn. "If it's about that ghost story, man, I told you to let it go." "I know, but I saw her, or something, out on Route 19. Ronald was silent for a moment, and Tim could practically hear him waking up. "Wait, you actually saw a woman in a red coat?" "Yes, she was just standing there. And then I got this weird call. Someone said, 'She's coming. Don't look back.' Tim, come on. Maybe you just freaked yourself out. There's no way." "Ron, I'm serious. I felt it. It wasn't just nerves or my mind playing tricks. It was like she was there, and then she wasn't." Ronald exhaled loudly. "Okay, let's say you did see something. Maybe someone's messing with you, setting up some elaborate prank. You did piss off that conspiracy guy with the Bigfoot article last month." Tim couldn't help but chuckle at the memory. "Yeah, but this didn't feel like a setup. It was too raw, and that call." All right," Ronald interrupted. "Let's think logically. Did you get any other clues? Anyone else mention seeing this girl?" "I talked to Sarah's mom. Sarah saw her a week before she died. Same description, red coat, something off about her. She didn't stop, though." Ronald let out a low whistle. "That's weird. Maybe there's more to it than just a rumor. I still think it's crazy, but want some company next time you check it out?" Tim hesitated. "Maybe. I need to do more digging first. Maybe talk to some locals who use that road regularly. See if anyone else has stories." "Just be careful," Ronald said, his tone more serious now. "If this thing is real, you don't want to be on its radar." "Yeah, I'll be careful." After hanging up, Tim poured another cup of coffee and opened his laptop. He needed to map out who else to interview and look up any police reports tied to Route 19. As he sipped his coffee, his mind kept replaying that eerie clicking of footsteps on the road. One thing was certain. He couldn't walk away from this now. Tim spent the next few hours scouring local forums and social media groups, looking for anyone mentioning Route 19 or strange sightings. Most of what he found were generic complaints about potholes and speed traps. But one post caught his eye. A user named Jackal79 had commented a few weeks ago about seeing a woman in a red coat late at night while driving that same stretch of road. Tim messaged the user, trying to sound casual. "Hey, saw your post about the woman on Route 19. Mind sharing a bit more?" Doing some research for an article. He wasn't sure if he'd get a reply, but it was a lead. Meanwhile, he made a list of people to interview. Locals who might have seen something, people who drove that route regularly. The cab company was also on his list. Maybe some of Rick's colleagues had stories of their own. Mist meowed from the windowsill, stretching languidly in a sunbeam. Tim smiled faintly, grateful for the quiet company. His phone buzzed, startling him. A reply from Jackal79. "Yeah, I saw her. Thought it was some drunk girl, but when I slowed down, she just vanished. Spooked the hell out of me. You really writing an article?" Tim replied quickly. "Yeah. Did you notice anything unusual about her?" A minute later. "Didn't see her face. Just the coat." Red, kind of worn, looked out of place. My radio went static when I passed her. Thought it was just bad reception, but it freaked me out. Static, Tim jotted it down. Another small detail, but significant. Electronics malfunctioning around paranormal events wasn't uncommon in folklore. He messaged back, "Did you report it to anyone?" "No. Figured no one would believe me. Just floored it home. Didn't use that road at night since." Tim thanked him for the info, adding it to his notes. He leaned back, considering his next move. Maybe the local police had something on file. He pulled up the station's number, deciding to play it cool. He'd dealt with skeptical cops before. Better to frame it as a follow-up on Rick's death. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Eastwood Police, Officer Carlson." "Hi, this is Tim Evans from the Tribune. I'm working on a piece about the recent death on Route 19. Thought I'd check in and see if there were any updates." A sigh crackled through the receiver. "No new developments. Coroner ruled it a heart attack. Sad, but nothing criminal." Tim hesitated. "Any reports of strange sightings out there, or complaints about that stretch of road?" Carlson sounded suspicious now. "Why do you ask?" "Just following a tip. A few locals mentioned seeing someone on the roadside before the incident. Could be nothing, but I'm thorough." A pause. "Not officially. Some folks talk, weird stories now and then. We chalk it up to tired drivers and imagination. You know how it is." "Right. Thanks for your time." After hanging up, Tim tapped his pen against his notepad. The stories were scattered but consistent. Sightings of the girl, electronic interference, fear gripping the witnesses. He needed something more concrete. A first-hand account, someone willing to go on record. He glanced at his phone, debating. Maybe it was time to visit Sarah's friends. Someone at that party might remember something useful. Grabbing his coat, he slipped his notebook into his pocket. As he was about to leave, Mist circled his legs, meowing in protest. "Sorry, girl," Tim murmured, bending down to scratch her chin. "I'll be back soon, promise." As he locked the door behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced back at the apartment windows, but everything looked normal. Shaking off the unease, he headed out to find some answers. Tim drove to the last known address of Sarah's friend, Megan, who had hosted the party the night Sarah died. The house was a small, well-kept bungalow with faded garden gnomes lining the walkway. He knocked twice, adjusting his collar as the door creaked open. A young woman with messy blonde hair peered out, squinting against the sun. "Yeah? Hey, I'm Tim Evans. I write for the Tribune. I wanted to ask you a few questions about Sarah." Megan hesitated, looking wary. "Why? I already told the cops everything." "I know. I just heard there might have been something strange that night." "A girl on the road?" Megan's eyes widened a fraction. "How did you—" She cut herself off and glanced back into the house. "Come in, but make it quick." Inside, the place was cluttered but cozy. Megan gestured to a lumpy armchair while she sat on the couch, hugging a throw pillow. "Look, it was just a party, all right? Nothing wild. Sarah was fine when she left. A little tipsy, but nothing crazy." "Did she mention seeing someone on the way home? Maybe earlier that week?" Tim pressed. Megan's jaw tightened. "She did, actually, but I thought she was just being paranoid. She swore she saw this girl, red coat, just standing there by the roadside. Said it freaked her out, but she didn't stop." "Did she say anything else? Did she think the girl was in trouble?" "She didn't say. Just that it felt wrong. Like the girl wasn't really there. We joked about it, told her she was seeing things. Then she—" Megan's voice broke, and she looked away, wiping at her eyes. Tim gave her a moment. "Did anyone else at the party see or hear anything unusual?" Megan sniffled. "I don't know. Everyone was drinking, you know? But later, a few people said they got weird texts from Sarah, rambling stuff, something about she's here and can't escape. Thought it was just drunk texting." Tim frowned. "Do you still have those messages?" Megan pulled out her phone and scrolled. After a minute, she handed it to Tim. The messages were fragmented and strange. "Can't get away." Red. "She's here. Eyes so dark. Can't breathe." Tim's stomach twisted. "Did anyone check her phone afterward?" "It was gone," Megan whispered. "Cops never found it. Said it must have been lost on the road." Tim returned the phone, mind racing. Something about the messages felt raw, panicked, too real to dismiss. Megan watched him with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Do you think it's real?" she asked. "Like some kind of ghost?" Tim forced a tight smile. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." As he left, the gravity of it all settled on him. Sarah's last moments sounded like pure terror. If this was just a series of coincidences, it was an elaborate and cruel one. But if it wasn't, he was already in deeper than he wanted to admit. Tim made a mental note to track down the other friends from the party. If there were more messages or sightings, they'd help piece this together. He glanced at the fading sky and felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Night would fall soon. And something told him that Route 19 wasn't done with him yet. Tim drove back toward the Tribune office, his thoughts swirling around Sarah's messages. He parked a few blocks away, needing the walk to clear his head. The autumn air was brisk, biting at his cheeks, but it helped sharpen his focus. He pulled out his phone and dialed Ronald again. It rang twice before his friend picked up, sounding more awake this time. "Hey, what's up?" Ronald asked. "I just talked to one of Sarah's friends," Tim said. Turns out Sarah texted a few people that night. Stuff about a girl in red, dark eyes, not being able to breathe. Ronald hummed thoughtfully. "Dark eyes? That's creepy. You sure it wasn't just Sarah being drunk? Megan showed me the messages. They were frantic. And here's the weird part. Sarah's phone disappeared after she died. No one could find it. That's odd. Could someone have taken it? Maybe. But why? It's not like it would be worth much. Plus, if someone was trying to cover something up, why not just destroy it?" Ronald was silent for a moment. "You think the girl in red did something to her?" "I don't know. It sounds crazy, but everyone who's seen this girl gets spooked. Rick, Sarah, that guy from the forum, and me. I can't shake the feeling there's something off." "Sounds like you're really going down the rabbit hole here," Ronald said, half joking. "But I'll admit, it's strange. Maybe there's a pattern we're missing." Tim's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. "Yeah, I'll keep digging. Let you know if I find anything else. Just take care of yourself, all right? You sound on edge." Tim managed a smile. "I'm good. Just tired. Thanks, Ron." He ended the call and continued walking, deciding to head to the nearby diner. As he turned the corner, he spotted a cluster of police cars parked outside a bar. Curious, he moved closer, keeping a respectful distance from the yellow tape marking the scene. A few patrons stood outside, talking in hushed voices. He approached a young guy with a leather jacket and asked, "What happened?" The guy looked pale. "Some guy just collapsed inside. Heart attack, they think. Weird thing is, people swear he was talking to someone who wasn't there right before." Tim's pulse quickened. "Did anyone say what the person looked like?" The guy shrugged. "Just rumors. Someone mentioned a woman in red, but I didn't see anything. Cops are saying it's just people freaking out." Tim thanked him and stepped back, trying to process this new piece of the puzzle. Another heart attack, another mention of the girl in red. He pulled out his phone and jotted down the details. As he made his way to the diner, a creeping sense of dread took root in his gut. This wasn't just an isolated incident. Something was moving through the town, and he needed to figure it out before anyone else died. Tim slid into a corner booth at the diner, ordering a black coffee and a turkey sandwich. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Hey, man, haven't seen you in a while. Everything good?" Tim hesitated before replying, "Yeah, just busy with a story. We'll catch up soon." He stared at the message, feeling a pang of guilt. His friends had noticed his growing obsession with work, or rather, with whatever was happening around Route 19. A clattering sound broke his thoughts as the waitress set his coffee down, offering a tired smile. "Rough day?" she asked. "You could say that," Tim replied, stirring in a packet of sugar. "Hey, you ever hear anything weird about Route 19? Like ghost stories?" She raised an eyebrow. "Honey, half this town thinks that road's cursed. Ever since that bridge got condemned, it's just bad news. People die out there. Accidents, heart attacks. My cousin swears he saw a girl in red one night, said she was just standing there, middle of the road, and when he blinked, poof, gone." Tim leaned forward. "When was this?" "Oh, a couple months back. He doesn't like to talk about it. Freaked him out real bad. He doesn't take that road at night anymore. Did he say anything about his radio acting weird?" The waitress frowned. "Actually, yeah. Said the music cut out, and there was just static. Gave him chills." Tim nodded, scribbling in his notepad. "You mind if I get his number? I'd like to hear his story." She hesitated. "I'll ask him first. Don't think he'll be too happy dredging that up again." "That's fair," Tim said, offering a grateful smile. Thanks. As the waitress moved to another table, Tim scrolled through his notes. The pattern was clear: sightings of the girl in red, electronics malfunctioning, and then death by heart attack. The problem was there was no clear cause and effect, just a trail of fear and tragedy. He glanced out the window as the sky darkened, the diner's neon sign flickering on. The uneasy feeling from earlier crept back, and he found himself looking over his shoulder more than once. He couldn't shake the sense that something was about to happen. His phone buzzed again, this time a message from Megan. I asked around. One of Sarah's friends thinks she saw the same girl a few days before Sarah died, near that old gas station off Route 19. She was crying, just standing by the road. Really freaked her out. Tim's heart thumped. A new lead. Maybe this friend could shed more light on what Sarah saw or thought she saw. He typed back, Can you get me her number? As he waited for a reply, he couldn't help but feel the town itself was suffocating, pulling him deeper into something he couldn't yet define. He took a long sip of coffee, letting the bitter taste ground him, while his mind raced through the pieces of the puzzle. Whatever was happening, it wasn't done yet, and neither was he. Tim finished his sandwich in silence, his mind swirling with the clues and stories. He paid the bill and left the diner, the evening chill sinking deeper into his bones. As he walked back to his car, he noticed a figure leaning against the lamppost, a man in his 50s, smoking a cigarette. His weathered face looked familiar. Hey, Tim called out. You all right? The man squinted through the smoke. You the reporter asking about the girl on Route 19? Tim nodded. Yeah. You know something? The man took a long drag, the embers lighting up his lined face. Name's Roy. I used to drive the night shift for the local taxi company. Heard about Rick. Damn shame. You knew Rick? Roy nodded. We weren't close, but we'd swap stories on break. You know, just passing time. He mentioned that girl once. Said he picked her up near that old gas station one night. Quiet thing. Long hair, red coat. He thought she was just drunk or something. But she didn't say a word the whole ride. Just stared out the window. Tim felt a shiver. Where did he drop her off? Roy flicked ash onto the ground. That's the thing. He said when he looked in the rear view, she was gone. Just vanished. Thought maybe she'd slipped out at a red light without him noticing. Gave him the creeps, though. What did he do after that? Drove straight home. Didn't take any more fares that night. Said he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Tim's phone buzzed. Megan had sent a number. Sarah's friend who had seen the girl. He glanced at Roy. Thanks for telling me. Did Rick mention anything else? Anything strange? Roy took one last drag, then stubbed the cigarette out on the lamppost. Just that his radio went dead when she got in the car. He thought it was a loose wire, but it came back on as soon as he saw she was gone. Never did figure it out. Tim watched as Roy walked off into the night, his words settling uneasily in his mind. It wasn't just sightings. There was a pattern. People interacted with this girl, thought she was real, until she wasn't. And then, soon after, they died. Tim got into his car, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. He called the number Megan sent, hoping to catch Sarah's friend before it got too late. A young woman picked up. Hello? Hi, this is Tim Evans. I'm writing about what happened to Sarah. Megan said you might have seen something the week before she died. There was a pause. Yeah, I saw her, the girl in red. I didn't know it was important. Tim's grip on the phone tightened. Can you tell me what happened? I was driving home late, saw her standing near the gas station, looked like she'd been crying. I slowed down, but, I don't know, something told me not to stop. I just kept going. Did you notice anything else? Was anyone with her? No, just her. I didn't think much of it until Sarah died. Now, I don't know. It feels connected. Did you mention this to anyone else? No, I didn't think it mattered. I just thought maybe I was seeing things. Tim thanked her and hung up. His thoughts raced as he pieced together the sightings, the strange occurrences, the sudden deaths. The girl wasn't just a random apparition. She was part of something bigger, and somehow, people who saw her didn't live long afterward. As he started the car, a sudden dread washed over him. He'd seen her too. Tim's hands gripped the steering wheel as his mind reeled. He hadn't considered it before. He'd seen the girl himself. Just for a moment, but it was enough. The car felt suddenly claustrophobic, and Tim pulled over to the side of the road. He needed to breathe, to think. Was he next? Was it just a matter of time before he ended up like Rick or Sarah? Taking a few deep breaths, Tim forced himself to focus. There had to be a way to break the pattern. Not everyone who saw the girl necessarily died, at least not right away. If he could just figure out what triggered the deaths, maybe he could protect himself. He scrolled through his phone and pulled up the notes from the forum he'd found earlier. One post caught his eye. A story from a neighboring town about a young guy who'd picked up a girl in a red coat on a rainy night. He'd survived to post about it, mentioning that he had dropped her off at an old church and never saw her again. Tim glanced at the map on his phone, looking for churches along Route 19. One popped up, St. Mary's, long abandoned and half buried in overgrowth. If there was any connection, he needed to check it out. As he started the car again, his phone rang. It was Michael. "Hey, man," Tim answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hey, just checking in," Michael said. "You good? You sound tense." "Yeah, just caught up in this story. It's turning out to be more complicated than I thought." Michael chuckled. "When is it not? Look, if you need a break, come over for dinner sometime. Megan's been asking about you." "I will," Tim promised, though his thoughts were far from socializing. "Thanks for checking in. Anytime. Don't go getting yourself into trouble." Tim hung up and made his way toward the church, his mind replaying his brief sighting of the girl over and over. He couldn't recall details, just the bright red coat, her back turned, and that unshakable feeling of wrongness. As he approached St. Mary's, the sky had turned fully dark and the wind howled through the broken windows. The place was half collapsed, vines snaking through the stone like veins. He parked and approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. The inside was worse than he'd imagined. Dust, broken pews, remnants of candle holders scattered on the floor. A faint, musty smell lingered, mixing with the cold night air. He moved toward the altar, shining his light over faded murals and warped wooden beams. His footsteps echoed and his own breathing seemed too loud. Just as he was about to turn back, he noticed something scratched into the wooden pulpit. "She shows you the end." Tim traced the words with his finger, feeling a chill creep up his spine. A sudden noise, a creak from the back of the church, made him whip around. He strained to listen, but the silence swallowed any other sound. Just as he convinced himself it was the wind, his phone buzzed again, this time a text from Ronald. "Hey, you all right? Got a weird feeling. Just checking in." Tim frowned. Ronald wasn't usually one for gut feelings. He typed back, "I'm fine. Just investigating. We'll catch up later." Pocketing his phone, Tim couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Being watched. The darkness seemed thicker here, and the shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners. He decided to leave, but just as he turned, his flashlight flickered, plunging him into darkness for a split second. When the light steadied, he saw it, barely visible through the cracked stained glass. A figure, standing outside, wearing red. Tim's breath caught, and he stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his ears. When he steadied the beam again, the figure was gone. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wasn't just investigating anymore, he was part of it now. Tim forced himself to step outside the church, his pulse still racing. The wind had picked up, rattling the bare branches overhead. He scanned the area with his flashlight, but the figure was gone, if it had ever been there at all. He rubbed his temple, feeling a headache forming. This was becoming too much, too real. He was used to chasing down stories, exposing corruption, but not fighting off his own paranoia. Was he imagining things now? Was this what Rick had felt before he died? A rustle from the bushes made Tim whirl around, but it was just a stray cat, darting off into the darkness. He let out a shaky breath. His phone buzzed again, another message from Ronald. "Seriously, man, you okay?" Tim hesitated before replying. "Yeah, just dealing with something. Can we meet tomorrow?" As he drove away from the church, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He glanced repeatedly in his rearview mirror, half expecting to see that red coat on the side of the road. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He needed to clear his head, but where? His apartment felt too empty, too vulnerable. Without thinking, he drove to Ronald's place. When he pulled up, the porch light flicked on, and Ronald stepped out, still in his lab coat, a curious look on his face. Tim got out, trying to steady his breathing. "Hey," Ronald gave him a once-over. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Tim forced a laugh. "Something like that." Inside, the familiar smell of chemicals and coffee greeted him. Ronald moved a stack of papers off the couch and gestured for Tim to sit. What's going on? You're shaking. Tim ran a hand through his hair. I'm working on this story, right? About these weird deaths on Route 19. But now, it's like I'm in the story. Seeing things. Ronald leaned back, thoughtful. Seeing what? A girl. Red coat. I thought it was just rumors, but I saw her. Twice now, and both times it felt wrong, like reality was bending. Ronald didn't laugh or brush it off like Tim expected. Instead, he nodded slowly. Stress can do weird things to your brain. You've been working a lot, haven't you? Yeah, but this feels different. People are dying after they see her. Heart attacks, like their bodies can't handle it. Ronald raised an eyebrow. Mass hysteria? Some kind of shared delusion? That's what I thought, but it's not just one or two people. It's like a pattern. Ronald poured them both coffee. Let's think logically. Maybe it's not the girl. Maybe it's something else. A toxin, a contaminant in the area that affects brain function and heart rhythm. If people are seeing the same thing, it could be neurological. Tim nodded, latching onto the scientific explanation like a lifeline. That makes sense. Maybe it's a gas leak or something. But why only on Route 19? And why the girl? Brain tries to make sense of chaos by creating familiar patterns. Maybe people are predisposed to see something humanoid, a girl, in that state. I could run some tests, check for contaminants. You said an old gas station was involved, right? Could be something in the soil. Tim felt a small flicker of hope. Yeah, maybe. I'll see what I can find out. Thanks. As Tim left Ronald's place, the logical explanation settled his nerves. For now. But in the back of his mind, the image of the girl lingered, like a bruise that wouldn't fade. The next morning, Tim was up before the sun. He brewed a strong pot of coffee and stared blankly at the wall, while mist padded silently across the counter, brushing against his arm like a living metronome. The comforting weight of her presence wasn't enough to shake the dread curling in his stomach. He packed his gear, a camera, notebook, voice recorder, and headed out. First stop, the old gas station by Route 19. The place had been shut down for years, but the rusted sign still stood, creaking gently in the breeze. Weeds choked the pavement, and the pump handles hung like limp limbs. Tim parked across the street and walked the perimeter slowly, snapping photos. He took a soil sample near the pumps, figuring Ronald could test it later. Inside the station, the dust was thick and undisturbed. Cracked linoleum curled away from the floor. A sun-bleached map was still pinned behind the counter, Route 19 circled in fading red marker. He crouched down by the old freezer in the corner and noticed something odd. Scratches on the wall. Dozens of tiny vertical lines, like tally marks. He counted them. 53. Someone had been keeping track of something. A sound outside made him freeze. A slow shuffle of gravel. He stood up and peeked through the cracked window. Nothing. He stepped out, the morning sun now clearing the trees, casting long shadows across the lot. He made his way around the back of the building and stopped. A red ribbon tangled in the brambles. It looked new. He didn't touch it, just took a photo and made a mental note. As he turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Across the road, half hidden in the trees. A flash of red. Tim stood frozen, breath shallow. The figure didn't move, didn't shift. Just stood there, partially obscured by the tree line. He raised his camera slowly, hands trembling, and clicked. The shutter echoed louder than it should have. He blinked. She was gone. The trees swayed, empty. Tim exhaled shakily and stumbled back to his car. He didn't start it right away, just sat there, staring at the frame in the camera's viewfinder. Empty road, nothing but trees, no figure, no red. He drove back to the city in silence. The image burned into his memory more than any lens could capture. As he pulled into Ronald's driveway, he felt a tremor of doubt. What if this wasn't environmental? What if Ronald's tests came back clean? What would he believe then? Ronald answered the door in sweats, surprised to see Tim so early. Didn't expect you till afternoon. I brought you something, Tim said, handing over the soil sample and showing him the photo of the ribbon. Ronald took it with a nod, brow furrowed. I'll run the tests. Should know something by tomorrow. Tim hesitated. There's something else. I saw her again at the gas station. Ronald's eyes narrowed. Same figure? Red coat? Yeah, I took a photo. Nothing showed up. Ronald nodded slowly. Let's just wait on the results, one step at a time. Tim agreed. But in the pit of his stomach, something told him time wasn't a luxury he had much of left. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind brushing the windows had Tim on edge. He left the bedroom light on and kept his phone close, watching the screen like it might flash a warning. Mist stayed close, unusually restless, as if she sensed something too. At 3:17 a.m., a faint tap echoed from the living room window. Tim sat up, heart hammering. Mist froze at the foot of the bed, ears perked. He crept into the hallway, pausing at the corner. Another tap. Soft. Deliberate. Tim flipped the hallway light on and peeked around the corner. Nothing. He walked slowly to the window and looked out onto the street. The glow from the street lamp flickered just once and then held steady. The sidewalk was empty, except for a small red object. Tim unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch. The night was still and frigid, his breath forming small clouds. He approached the red shape. It was a ribbon, same shade, same length, this one tied in a loose, perfect bow. He looked up, scanning the street, the rooftops, the alley. Nothing. No footsteps, no sound. He backed into the house and locked the door, heart racing. The girl wasn't bound to Route 19 anymore. She had followed him home. The next morning, Tim didn't wake up so much as jolt upright, like his body had decided sleep was too dangerous. The ribbon still sat on his kitchen table next to his keys, untouched. Mist hadn't gone near it. He dressed quickly and drove to Ronald's lab, feeling the weight of dread settle deeper into his spine. The streets looked normal, bright, noisy, and alive, but everything in him said the world had tilted just a little. Something was now wrong at the root. Ronald met him at the door with a mug of coffee and a grim expression. The soil sample was clean, he said without preamble. No chemicals, no toxins, nothing that would cause hallucinations. Tim exhaled slowly. So it's not the environment, not unless it's something we don't have a name for. Ronald motioned him inside. But I did find something weird. The ribbon? Tim nodded. What about it? There's nothing on it. No fibers, no pollen, no trace elements. It's like it hasn't been outside. Ever. That makes no sense. Even lab-grade cloth picks up something. It's sterile. Tim stared at the ribbon in the evidence bag. Like it wasn't made here? Ronald gave him a long look. Like it wasn't made anywhere. Tim didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They both knew what the implication was. I think you need help, Ronald said quietly. Not from me. From someone who deals with this kind of thing. You think I'm crazy? I think if what you're seeing is real, then you're in danger. And if it's not, you're still in danger. Tim ran a hand through his hair. I know someone, an old source, used to write about fringe phenomena. He might know something. Good, Ronald said. Do it soon. Tim didn't wait. He went straight to his apartment, grabbed his notes, and dug out a battered business card from a box of old contacts. The name on it was faint, half faded by time and coffee spills. Malcolm Avery, paranormal consultant. They hadn't spoken in years. Tim had interviewed him once during a rash of supposed hauntings outside Denver. Back then, Malcolm seemed eccentric but grounded, someone who didn't buy into every shadow and whisper. Tim dialed the number. It rang, once, twice. Then a voice, gravelly and alert. Who gave you this number? Malcolm, it's Tim Evans. We talked years ago, Denver. A pause, then, I remember, you said you didn't believe any of it. I didn't, Tim said. I do now. Another pause. Where are you? Eastwood. Something's happening here. People are dying. I've seen her, Malcolm, the girl in red. Malcolm was silent for a long time. Then, lock your windows, keep your cat inside, don't answer if she knocks. I'll be there by nightfall. The line went dead. Tim lowered the phone, heart pounding. It wasn't just that Malcolm believed him, it was that Malcolm sounded afraid. By late afternoon, clouds had rolled in thick and low, smearing the sky in bruised tones of gray. Tim kept himself busy, checked and rechecked the locks, unplugged everything but the essentials, even set up a recorder by the front door. Mist, unusually quiet, followed him from room to room like a shadow. As the sun sank, his anxiety climbed. Malcolm arrived just before dusk. His car, a dented, dust-caked Volvo, growled into the lot like it resented the road it had taken. Tim opened the door before Malcolm even knocked. Malcolm looked older, thinner than Tim remembered, his salt and pepper beard grown long and uneven. He wore a canvas coat that had clearly seen too many winters and carried a leather satchel that jangled faintly when he moved. You look terrible, Malcolm said, walking in without waiting for permission. That's good. Means you're not under its thumb yet. Tim closed the door. What do you mean its thumb? What is it? Malcolm tossed the satchel on the table and looked around. Let's assume, for the sake of survival, that she's not a ghost. Ghosts don't leave sterile ribbons. Ghosts don't expand territory. They're echoes. This is something else. Tim frowned. Then what is she? Malcolm shrugged off his coat. A predator, a mimic. Something that wears grief like a costume and uses memory as bait. Tim sat down slowly. But why now? Why Route 19? Why any place? Malcolm said. These things don't work on motive. They don't want, they feed. Something drew it here. Pain, loss, something ripe. And now it's hunting. Tim was quiet for a moment, then nodded toward the satchel. What's in there? Protection, maybe. Malcolm unzipped it and began laying out objects. A weathered compass, 3 small jars filled with herbs, a pocket knife, and what looked like a folded strip of black cloth. None of this stops it outright. But if it's old world, folkloric, some things might slow it down. Tim looked at the items, heart pounding again. So what do we do? Malcolm met his eyes. We find its anchor, whatever's letting it root itself here. Destroy that, and maybe we starve it. But until then, we stay inside tonight, no windows open, no answering voices, not even if it sounds like someone you love. Tim nodded, and for the first time in days, he felt less alone. But outside, just beyond the streetlights, something watched. And it waited. The next morning came slowly, gray and reluctant. Tim and Malcolm had barely slept. They'd taken turns watching the windows, speaking only in low murmurs. Nothing had happened overnight, but that only made it worse, like the calm before a storm. Malcolm brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint and stared at the ribbon still sealed in the evidence bag. It's waiting. That's what these things do. They don't rush. Tim sipped from his mug, bleary-eyed. Then we make the first move. Malcolm nodded. We need to find the first point of contact, not the first sighting, the first pull. Where it started. If this thing has an anchor, it won't be random. It'll be something broken, something it latched onto. Tim paced, running through everything he'd collected. Sarah, Rick, the gas station, the church, even the old tally marks on the wall. There's one place we haven't gone. There's an abandoned farmhouse a few miles off Route 19. No one talks about it, but one of Sarah's friends mentioned it in passing, said it gave her a bad feeling even before Sarah died. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. A place with silence around it is worth looking at. Get your gear. The drive out was tense. The road narrowed, trees leaning in close on both sides. The farmhouse emerged like a bruise in the landscape. Sagging roof, boarded windows, the suggestion of something long forgotten trying to hold itself together. They parked at the edge of the gravel drive. The air felt heavier here, thick and damp. Mist let out a low growl from her carrier in the back seat. Tim checked the camera, voice recorder, flashlight. Malcolm adjusted the strap on his satchel, eyes scanning the field around them. Let's be quick, Malcolm muttered. It feels close. The porch groaned under their weight. Tim pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air was stale. Wallpaper peeled in strips, a broken mirror hung above the fireplace, cracked in a spiderweb pattern. What exactly are we looking for? Tim asked. Not what? Where? Malcolm moved through the room slowly, a space that feels stuck, like time doesn't know how to pass through it. They split up. Tim checked the kitchen and back hall while Malcolm took the stairs. In the far bedroom, Tim found it. The air was cold, unnaturally so. The wallpaper was scorched in one place, as if burned in the shape of a hand. On the floor, scattered ribbons, red, clean, and fresh. He called out, "Here!" Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Malcolm stepped in, his face going pale. That's it. That's the root. Tim crouched and noticed something else. Beneath the ribbons, a child's drawing. A girl in a red coat. No face. Just eyes. Wide, black, endless. Malcolm pulled a vial from his satchel and splashed its contents in a circle around the spot. The air shimmered like heat off asphalt. Whatever happened here, it's still feeding. Someone lived here and lost something. Tim stood. How do we break it? We burn it, salt the ground, break the mirror, destroy the symbol. Tim didn't hesitate. He picked up a rusted fire poker from the fireplace and smashed the mirror. It shattered with a shriek, like glass crying. He pulled a lighter from his coat, touched flame to the edge of the drawing. The paper curled, blackened, and then the house groaned. A wind slammed through the walls, shaking dust from the rafters. The door slammed shut. The lights flickered, though there was no power. Tim and Malcolm backed toward the hall. Malcolm dropping salt in their path. Go! Go now! Malcolm shouted. They burst through the front door as the air behind them howled with a voice that didn't belong to anything human. Tim didn't look back. He knew if he did, he might not leave. They reached the car, slammed the doors, and peeled away. Only when they were miles down the road did either of them speak. I think we found the anchor, Tim said, voice shaking. Malcolm nodded. I think we weakened it, but it's not done. Tim looked at the road ahead, neither was he. Later that evening, back at Tim's apartment, they reviewed the footage and audio. Most of it was static, the recorder garbled with brief, high-pitched tones that made the cat hiss and hide under the couch. But one clip just before the drawing ignited caught something else, a whisper. Not quite a voice, just a breath, but it formed words, barely audible but unmistakable. You saw me. Now I see you. Tim rewound it 3 times. Each time the words grew colder. Malcolm said nothing, just packed up his gear. Tim walked him to the door. You're leaving? Malcolm nodded. For now, this kind of thing doesn't end cleanly, but you've done enough to disrupt it. That gives you a window. How long? Malcolm looked out at the darkening street. Could be days, could be months. Just don't stop looking over your shoulder. Tim nodded. I won't. Malcolm paused. And if the girl ever speaks to you, if she uses your name, run. Don't argue. Don't think. Just run. He left without another word. Tim closed the door, triple locked it, and stood there in the silence, the echo of that whisper still in his head. He'd started with a story. Now he was part of it. 3 days passed. No sightings, no phone calls, no red ribbons, just the uneasy quiet of a city unaware. Tim kept working. Not on the hitchhiker story. At least not directly. He pulled records, tracked disappearances, looked for similar patterns in nearby towns. There were whispers from places farther west, odd dreams, strange deaths, ghost stories with overlapping themes, none as sharp or visceral as Eastwood's, but close. One evening, as he fed mist and went through an old interview file, the lights flickered, just once. He froze. Then his phone lit up. A number. No name. He answered. Silence. Then, Tim. The voice was young, familiar, female. His blood turned to ice. I see you, she said. You looked back. Tim stared at the screen long after the call ended. Heart pounding. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled. He leaned on the counter, barely breathing, the words echoing louder than they should have. The line went dead. Mist hissed. Tim grabbed his go bag and ran. He didn't stop until he reached Ronald's apartment on the other side of town. Ronald answered the door, half asleep, wearing sweatpants and a coffee-stained hoodie. Jesus, Tim. You look like hell. I think it's starting again. Tim dropped the bag on the floor and leaned against the wall, breath ragged. She called me, said my name. Ronald's expression hardened. You're not staying here without a plan. I know, I just needed to not be alone. Ronald nodded once. All right, but we're going to figure out how to stop this for good. Tim nodded, though a part of him already knew. You don't stop something like this. You survive it until it moves on, or until you do. The next morning, Tim woke in Ronald's spare room to the smell of burnt toast and strong coffee. Mist had taken up residence on the windowsill, tail twitching with uneasy rhythm. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, doing little to push back the exhaustion in his bones. Ronald knocked twice and poked his head in. You alive? Barely. There's coffee, and something vaguely resembling breakfast. Tim dragged himself to the kitchen table where Ronald pushed a chipped mug toward him. They ate in silence for a minute before Ronald leaned forward. I started digging, he said. Backtrack that number that called you. Masked ID, no trace. But the tower ping came from somewhere near the old train yard. Tim frowned. The one on the edge of Westbridge? Yeah, it's been abandoned for years, but apparently it used to be a holding point for disaster relief supplies. A lot of traffic in and out during a fire about 10 years ago. Might be worth checking out. Tim sipped his coffee. Feels like every time I think it's over, there's another door waiting. Ronald stood and grabbed a duffel bag. Then let's kick it in before it kicks back. They reached the train yard by early afternoon. The place was exactly what Tim expected. Rusting tracks, boxcars long since tagged and forgotten, windows boarded up with sun-warped plywood. The wind moved oddly here, like it had weight. Tim stepped over a length of twisted cable and looked around. You think this is it? Ronald nodded toward a row of crumbling storage units. Something's wrong with that one. Third from the end. You feel it? Tim did. like pressure behind his eyes. They moved toward it slowly. Tim's flashlight beam cut through the dust inside, catching on a series of hanging chains and a single child-sized chair bolted to the center of the floor. The air was colder here. Wrong. On the far wall, painted in a faded red smear, were the words, "You see what you bring with you." Tim's stomach turned. Ronald circled the room carefully, pulled out a thermal scanner. No heat signatures, but energy spikes, yeah? Something happened here, and maybe it still is. Tim moved closer to the wall, studying the paint, or whatever it was. Not quite red, not quite dry. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He didn't answer, just stared at the screen until it went dark again. Ronald's voice was steady, low. "We shouldn't stay long. This isn't a haunt. It's a mouth, and I think it just noticed us." Tim nodded, backing out slowly. As they stepped back into the daylight, Tim felt the warmth of the sun again. Barely. He turned once just to check. The storage unit door had closed. They hadn't touched it. Back at Ronald's, neither of them spoke much. Tim scrawled the phrase from the wall across the top of his notebook, circled it twice. "You see what you bring with you." If that was true, then maybe this thing wasn't just feeding off grief or fear. Maybe it was feeding off Tim, and maybe, just maybe, he was the reason it was still here. The next morning, Tim woke in Ronald's spare room to the smell of burnt toast and strong coffee. Mist had taken up residence on the windowsill, tail twitching with uneasy rhythm. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, doing little to push back the exhaustion in his bones. Ronald knocked twice and poked his head in. "You alive?" "Barely." "There's coffee and something vaguely resembling breakfast." Tim dragged himself to the kitchen table, where Ronald pushed a chipped mug toward him. They ate in silence for a minute before Ronald leaned forward. "I started digging," he said. "Backtracked that number that called you. Masked ID, no trace. But the tower ping came from somewhere near the old train yard." Tim frowned. "The one on the edge of Westbridge?" "Yeah, it's been abandoned for years, but apparently it used to be a holding point for disaster relief supplies. A lot of traffic in and out during a fire about 10 years ago. Might be worth checking out." Tim sipped his coffee. "Feels like every time I think it's over, there's another door waiting." Ronald stood and grabbed a duffel bag. "Then let's kick it in before it kicks back." They reached the train yard by early afternoon. The place was exactly what Tim expected. Rusting tracks, boxcars long since tagged and forgotten, windows boarded up with sun-warped plywood. The wind moved oddly here, like it had weight. Tim stepped over a length of twisted cable and looked around. "You think this is it?" Ronald nodded toward a row of crumbling storage units. "Something's wrong with that one. Third from the end. You feel it?" Tim did, like pressure behind his eyes. They moved toward it slowly. Tim's flashlight beam cut through the dust inside, catching on a series of hanging chains and a single child-sized chair bolted to the center of the floor. The air was colder here. Wrong. On the far wall, painted in a faded red smear, were the words, "You see what you bring with you." Tim's stomach turned. Ronald circled the room carefully, pulled out a thermal scanner. No heat signatures, but energy spikes, yeah. Something happened here, and maybe it still is. Tim moved closer to the wall, studying the paint, or whatever it was. Not quite red, not quite dry. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He didn't answer, just stared at the screen until it went dark again. Ronald's voice was steady, low. "We shouldn't stay long. This isn't a haunt. It's a mouth, and I think it just noticed us." Tim nodded, backing out slowly. As they stepped back into the daylight, Tim felt the warmth of the sun again. Barely. He turned once just to check. The storage unit door had closed. They hadn't touched it. Back at Ronald's, neither of them spoke much. Tim scrawled the phrase from the wall across the top of his notebook, circled it twice. "You see what you bring with you." If that was true, then maybe this thing wasn't just feeding off grief or fear. Maybe it was feeding off Tim, and maybe, just maybe, he was the reason it was still here. That night, Tim couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling while mist patrolled the room like a restless sentry. Every sound in the apartment seemed sharper, like the walls had thinned. Around 3 a.m., Tim slipped out of bed and opened his notebook. He flipped back through every detail, every clue, every headline and interview transcript. What if he'd missed something crucial, some breadcrumb pointing toward how to stop this? Or worse, something he'd done that had started it. A few pages in, he stopped. An old newspaper clipping, one he barely remembered copying into the file. Local teen hospitalized after claiming to see ghost girl on the train tracks, dated nearly 12 years ago. Eastwood, no name. He checked the byline. It wasn't his. It was Sarah's. Not about Sarah. Written by Sarah. She'd written for the school paper, covered urban legends. She'd chased the girl before anyone knew who she was. Tim blinked, his pulse quickening. All this time, he'd thought Sarah was just a victim, but maybe she was the first door the entity ever opened. Tim's hands went cold. He flipped the page. Another clipping. An op-ed Sarah wrote titled, "What if we make them real?" Tim read it twice. The girl hadn't picked Sarah at random. Sarah had found her first. And now Tim had found her again. His phone vibrated. No number, no message, just a single image, a red coat hanging on his apartment door. Tim stood motionless, staring at the screen, barely blinking. Every part of him screamed to run, to scream, to call someone, anyone. But he didn't. He just stood there, cold and still, like something ancient had risen up inside him and turned to stone. Mist let out a low, warning growl. He crept toward the door, slowly, carefully. He looked through the peephole. Nothing. He opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty. But there it was, hanging on the knob. A child's red coat swaying ever so slightly as if someone had just let go. Tim stepped back, shut the door, locked it, then bolted it. Lock clicks. Deadbolt. He placed the phone face down on the counter, turned off the lights, sat on the floor next to Mist. But this time he didn't wait. He opened his laptop, pulled out his notes, typed keywords into obscure archives, folklore indexes, pre-internet transcriptions, academic journals on entity mythology, spectral tulpas, post-traumatic manifestations. If it fed on memory, maybe he could starve it. If it mimicked, maybe he could unmask it. And if it was made real through belief, maybe he could unmake it by learning its story and rewriting it. He wasn't waiting anymore. Now, he was hunting back. Tim made a list: names, sources, books, terms. He emailed a professor he once interviewed on memory-based hauntings, tracked down a local occultist who specialized in protective bindings, dug through Old Town records for sudden disappearances. By mid-morning, he had a lead, a forgotten, unpublished thesis from the 1970s titled "The Red Spectre, Fear Constructs in Regional American Folklore," written by a folklorist named Lenora Griggs. He found her last known address. She was still alive, living just 2 towns over. Tim packed a recorder, notebook, and the red coat from the doorknob, sealed now in a plastic garment bag. If Lenora knew anything at all, he had to hear it. He called Ronald from the car. "Where are you going?" Ronald asked, voice laced with worry. "To find the woman who might have written the rules before this thing ever showed up." "And if she's dead?" Tim started the engine. "Then I'll read her book." Lenora lived in a creaking Victorian house on the edge of Lanton, a quiet town tucked into a fold of pine-covered hills. Her mailbox was rusted. Wind chimes dangled from the porch like brittle bones. Tim knocked once, then again. Eventually the door opened a crack. A single eye, sharp and suspicious, peered out. "You're not a salesman, or census." "I'm Tim Evans," he said. "I read your thesis. I think one of your legends is real." The eye blinked once, then the door opened wider. Lenora Griggs stood before him, frail but alert, wrapped in a wool cardigan and skepticism. "You're either desperate or dangerous. Come in." Inside, Lenora's house smelled of old cedar, tea leaves, and dry paper. Books lined every wall, stacked and leaning like drunken sentinels. She led Tim to a small sitting room and gestured to an armchair with worn upholstery. "I don't entertain often," she said, settling across from him. "So, you think she's real?" Tim unzipped the plastic garment bag and laid the red coat gently across his lap. "She left this on my door. I've seen her. Others have died after they did." Lenora leaned forward, studying the coat like it might flinch. "Tell me what you've learned." He walked her through everything: Sarah, Rick, the gas station, the storage unit, the whispers, the phrase, "You see what you bring with you." Lenora's face darkened at that. "I wrote about that phrase, only once, because I didn't want to give it weight. It shows up in variant forms in West Appalachian tales, usually tied to a woman who's not quite dead, not quite alive." "Then what is she?" "She's a reflection, a construct, not of grief, but of guilt. And the more you investigate, the more you remember, the more she becomes permanent. She doesn't haunt places. She haunts truths." Tim sat back, stunned. "How do I stop her?" Lenora reached for a leather-bound notebook and flipped it open. You need to confront the memory that brought her, the one you buried, or she'll anchor there and she'll never leave. Not until she finishes you. Tim's mouth was dry. How do I even know which one it is? You'll know, Lenora said. It's the one that hurts to think about, the one that makes you want to change the subject. That's where she latches. He closed his eyes. The weight in his chest shifted, not lighter, but clearer. Lenora stood, crossed to a narrow shelf, and pulled down a box wrapped in wax twine. She handed it to Tim. These are notes I never published. Rituals, symbols, some counter stories. You won't destroy her with these, but they might delay her long enough for you to face what you've buried. Tim took the box carefully. Why help me? Lenora gave a tired smile. Because I once saw her too, and I wasn't ready. Maybe you still are.